State and local governments are also creating programs and legislation that look to the future. In Arizona, people transformed an area of the desert into a lush, tropical valley. But it was not without paying a price. Water, the region's most precious commodity, was endangered.
Well, I think what it would mean is stagnation. Tucson would have become like the old mining communities. Once the ore body runs out, the town dies. When the water resource is gone, the city dies.
Conflict over water is embedded in Arizona's history. Water rights have been the source of disputes among families, farmers, miners, Native Americans, and whole communities. Projects were enacted to increase water supplies. Massive dams and water canals were built, and Arizona flourished. Agriculture boomed, with 4 growing seasons accounting for 89% of all water use. Real estate developers created oases to accommodate the ever-expanding population. When water supplies from the dams and canals were no longer enough to support the tremendous need, enormous quantities of groundwater were pumped to make up the difference. Arizona had a problem. The quality of water deteriorated. The earth cracked open, creating fissures that run on for miles. If the pumping continued, Arizona would run out of groundwater, but no one could agree on how to regulate. Bruce Babbitt, governor of Arizona, made it his primary goal to draft and pass a groundwater code.
I gathered together the major players, the cities, agriculture, the mines, locked the door and began negotiating intensely and personally over about a 9-month period in which we produced a draft bill. We then took it to the legislature and said, here it is, take it or leave it. And they passed it in a 1-day session, and they passed it exactly as we drafted it.
Kathleen Ferris, one of the original drafters of the code, is the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources.
There are many innovative features of the Groundwater Code, but I think 3 stand out in my mind. The first is that we quantified groundwater rights and then set out a system that allows those rights to be traded in the marketplace. Secondly, we are requiring mandatory conservation by all water users under a plan adopted by the Department of Water Resources. And thirdly, anyone who wants to sell subdivided land, create a subdivision, has to demonstrate a 100-year water supply for that subdivision before he's entitled to proceed.
For the first time, Arizona had a comprehensive water code. It regulated not only the number of wells that could be drilled, but the amount of water that could be pumped. And it contained the seeds of its own longevity. A unique non-severability clause stated that if any portion of the law were found unconstitutional, the entire law would be void. This has kept the concerned parties together to protect their common and individual interests. The law has made water conservation a major component in the social and economic affairs of the state. Russ Schlittenhart is an Eloy, Arizona cotton farmer.
This is an irrigation tube that is used for drip irrigation on our farm. It has an emitter here that drips water into the furrow system and saves us about 50% of what we normally do with the conventional system of irrigation. And in some cases, we've even found that the yields are greater.
What we're doing here in Arizona would not be possible without the cooperation of the private sector. And so I think we're really working hand in hand. The state is doing its share, passing laws and trying to regulate water uses. Water users are doing their share by trying to comply.
Western water law, this doctrine of prior appropriation, really came out of the gold rush. It was developed in the private sector, if you will, by voluntary groups of miners seeking to work out the conflicts and the allocation of a scarce resource. It's a concept that we got away from, and it's one that I think we're now coming back to and that you can see in the cooperative way that the private sector and Arizona government have come together to invent the future and learn from the past.